Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session. This is Dr. Charles E. Lewis, Jr. He is the director and co-founder of CRISP, Congressional Research Institute for Social Work and Policy. During his time on the Hill, serving as Deputy Chief of Staff and Communications Director of former Congressman E.D. Towns, he was instrumental in creating the Congressional Social Work Caucus with the idea that it would be a platform to allow social workers to have a voice in Congress. In 2012, he founded CRISP as a 501 for nonprofit, nonpartisan organization to complement the mission of Social Work Caucus and to ensure its presence on the Hill. Dr. Lewis is an adjunct professor at Columbia University School of Social Work and supervises students in the M.S.W policy concentration. A professional social worker, Dr. Lewis received his M.S.W degree in clinical counseling at Whitney M. Jr. School of Social Work at Clark Atlanta University. He earned his Ph.D. in social policy analysis at the Columbia University School of Social Work in 2002, and he strongly believes that social workers have much to bring to policy to discuss their hands-on knowledge about the real-world experiences of people from all walks of life. Welcome, Dr. Charles E. Lewis.
Give me 1 second here.
Okay, 1 second, guys.
I'm just trying to communicate with someone, All right, so here I am. And I'm glad to be here on this Student Advocacy Day, and so glad that you're here on this Student Advocacy Day. So we can, you can join us if you want to by sharing your camera and be a part of this conversation. I mean, I would like to hear something about how you are, how the day has gone so far. If you chime in. Oh, here we got two people joining us. Hi, Bernice, Mark. Okay, yeah, we get some people. How's it been going so far?
Impactful.
Okay, so listen. I'm going to talk about poverty and inequality. Okay, what do we know about poverty in this country? Right? I'll say, well, poverty is higher than it needs to be. And interesting, I didn't get the chance to finish it. There's an article in the New York Times today that talks about why poverty has been so entrenched in the United States. That we've been fighting poverty now for decades, but it seems that we haven't been, able to make any deep cuts in poverty since since Lyndon Johnson and the war on poverty, and that one of the things they talked about is that it's not because we haven't spent money to try to reduce poverty, but because we have increased our budget to address poverty significantly over the years. But despite that fact, poverty still remains entrenched, and of course, poverty for people of color, it's worse, and poverty for children is pretty bad, and so we still have work to do in terms of social workers and addressing poverty. So there are many roots of poverty, but part of the equation is inequality. So I wish I had my PowerPoint presentations to show you the exact data in terms of the numbers, but I could tell you that inequality, I can assuredly tell you that inequality in the United States has been increasing dramatically over the years, and it's unabated. It's not stopped. I think the last figure I heard was that I don't know, at one time, maybe top executives at corporations may have made about 50 times the average worker's salary. Anybody have an idea what it is now? Want to take a guess? how many times the average salary do you think the average corporate executive makes?
I'm going to say 5,000, Dr. Charles asked.
Well, not quite 5,000, but it's something like 328 times. So if your employee is making $50,000, you multiply that by 328, and that's the average. All right, so there's going to be a lot of people making more than, and I would imagine it's easily some people making 5,000. Sure, but the average is somewhere in the mid 300, 350, which is crazy for me. But what we have managed to develop in the United States, we have our country, in order for us to have economic growth, right? It's a matter of supply and demand. People produce goods and people buy goods. And so you got to have disposable income in order to buy goods. But the cost of housing and health, and for many childcare and those expenses, means that you don't have as much disposable income as you might. So the last figure I heard, that 2/3 of Americans, all right, are living paycheck to paycheck. Okay, and that's different for different levels of income. So if someone is making, say, $35,000 a year, and and paying a third of that for rent and other expenses, then it's going to be difficult to have disposable income. So you are, living paycheck to paycheck. But so you figure if you're making $100,000, that shouldn't be as much of a problem. No, because people who make $100,000 are going to want to live in a better neighborhood, driving a better car, and so forth. So you're going to find people who are making $200,000 a year living paycheck to paycheck. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because the economy, 80% of purchases in terms of dollar quantity are made by 20% of the population. So think about that. All right, that 80% of cars that are bought, and houses that are bought, in terms of their value and the numbers, that a small amount of people are accounting for a huge amount of the. So that means that we have a really unbalanced economy, and the more affluent folk are sort of keeping it going, and people at the lower end are just hanging on and surviving, and so they're kind of stuck, all right, and people in poverty are just stuck. And obviously poverty has a lot of different impacts on people. And obviously one is the unhoused, people who are homeless or, are forced to live with people that, normally they may have a place to stay, maybe sleeping on somebody's couch, people sleeping in their cars, with children. I mean, there are thousands of people that I know, particularly in California, who that sleep in their cars, with children. And so all of this is just some examples of of what poverty is doing to a number of people in the country. And what anybody here listen to Bloomberg radio? You do, Jennifer? All right. I listen to Bloomberg. I'm just fascinated by some of the conversations they have on there, because these are the high end folk when we're talking about on Bloomberg, and they call themselves the investors. All right, meaning that they talk about billions. They don't even talk about millions anymore. This company controls $20 billion in assets, and BlackRock or something has $2 trillion in assets, and Goldman Sachs has $3 trillion in assets, and so they're the money managers for people with wealth. Okay, I'm so sorry that I'm not near my my home computer. I'm at the National Association of Social Workers, so I don't have all my statistics right at hand. But I do know enough about what's going on to tell you that we have created quite a few billionaires in the last several decades. The money has gone significantly to the top 1%, but as I was saying earlier, that is not just the top 1%. It's not the 99. When Occupy Wall Street was on the scene and they were complaining about the 1%, it's more the 20%. Okay, those people who are not super wealthy. I mean, they don't have several billions of dollars. They just have a couple of 20, 30 million. In terms, but those are the people who do have a lot of power, a lot of clout, and eventually have a lot of say in our economic policies. So poverty and wealth inequality goes hand in hand. And I bring up Bloomberg because one of the things we're talking about now is inflation. Have you been noticing that's the buzzword now? And so theories of inflation, inflation from a pure monetary policy perspective is that there's more money being printed and put into the system so that the value of that money diminishes. So it's like when you have a lot of cash flowing in the system, then people will be able to pay more. So if they want a house, they can pay a lot more than the house is really valued under normal circumstances. So a $500,000 house may now cost $1 million, and so having that kind of money going through the system obviously begins to push prices up above their real value, and so you see auctions for paintings and then you see people building these super yachts because they just have so much cash going through the system, and that was a deliberate choice on the part of the Federal Reserve. Anybody have heard the term quantitative easing? Okay, when you get a chance, you might want to Google quantitative easing and inflation, and so you can see that the connection is that the Fed they have what is called a balance sheet, and so they're from time to time they print money. Hello? Okay, they print money and circulate it in the economy to shore up the economy. Okay, I mean, I could go on and on about this. So stop me if you have some questions. Stop me if you have some comments. If you have some comments on some of the things I'm saying, please, I like to hear your views too. They say this is a lecture, but I don't like lectures. Okay, I like discussions and conversations. I will lecture if you don't want to say nothing, but if you do want to say something, please jump in. Okay, so so going back to the last major recession, I guess we could say that was like 2008, when everything was falling through. It was at the end of the Bush presidency. Sort of remember that when Barack Obama was elected for the first term, and they were trying to. The stock market had fallen the most it has since the Depression, and people even call it the Great Recession, and some even call it a mini depression. And so the government, all right, we don't believe in socialism for the poor, okay, but they had socialism for the rich, okay. They said that these banks were too big to fail, and so the government poured in billions of dollars to keep the economy, keep these corporations and banks solvent and afloat. And as a result, there was a lot of money spent rescuing the banks, and then they lowered, in order to stimulate the economy, they lowered interest rates. Okay, you've been hearing how interest rates are going up slowly in order to fight inflation. Well, they were going to do the opposite back then. They were lowering the interest rates until the interest rates were pretty much zero. And so, what does that mean? Anybody? It means these corporations could get free money, pretty much. They could borrow as much money as they want, and they didn't have to pay interest on it. They just have to pay the principal on the loans, on these loans. So they were very excited, happy about that, and it lasted longer than most people thought it would. It's lasted for at least more than a decade, and now so investors got used to this, all right, and so. So now that the interest rates are going up, they're really upset because now they got to pay interest on this money instead of. But they managed in the interim, while they were giving away free money, they managed to accumulate a lots of money, but that money didn't stay in the United States. It went into offshore accounts. They began speculating and investing in international, in other countries, in other stock markets, and so I think you could almost say that our economy was now not being built or based on what we were making. Okay, typically the economy grows and because of stuff that we're making. If we're building housing, if we're building roads, people get jobs and they pay and they pay taxes, and that's how the economy generates more money. But now you've got these people who just invest in money making schemes almost, and so they're not really making anything. They invest in this money, and I know I might be going a little fast here, but and I'm going to slow down in a minute. But and then they have this device. You may have heard these terms: stock buybacks. Anybody know what a stock buyback is? Want to try? Jennifer? Mark? What do you think a stock buyback is?
I'm not exactly for sure. There was something like that, I think, recently. Stock buybacks were an issue during COVID, if I remember right. They didn't want companies to get like COVID money and then buy,
Right.
buy shares of their stock with that.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that has something to do with like when the stocks are like they sell the stocks off, wait for them to get low, and then buy them back. Not exactly sure, but I do know that it's been a hot button topic.
Yeah. So corporations buy their own stock. All right. And then the money that's generated from those buybacks by buying their own stock, then that money is distributed to shareholders as dividends. So that means that the shareholders is getting money, but that money is not doing anything in terms of helping the economy, for one, and that money is no longer going to be taxed, as capital gains, even at that low rate. So these corporations are able to, contribute to the wealth of their stakeholders and avoid taxes. So and so and like you said, Mark, during the COVID crisis and all the money that the government was pouring into the economy and different, particularly the tech industries, I believe Zoom and others, like they double their profits, during that time. And so rather than reduce the cost of their their product, they bought back their stocks and gave the money to the dividends to their shareholders. Now, and the danger of this situation, and when I'm talking a lot about on this investor level here for a minute, is that the government just recently, the Biden administration and the Congress, when the Congress was in the hands of Democrats, recently passed this. What did he call it? The bill that would subsidize, chip building, right? Because it's an effort to make the United States more competitive in terms of developing chips and selling chips. The Europeans, of course, were they said it's unfair. You can't subsidize your companies, but what so they're going to give corporations huge amounts of money to build chips. All right. The problem is that they may get that money and buy back their shares instead of building chips. There's nothing, right now there's nothing that would prevent them from doing that. So that the scenario that I just kind of pointed out is just one to say that any wealth inequality is going to continue until there's some policies to address it, because the people who are making the wealth have no intention of slowing down and taking less. All right. Everybody want to be Elon Musk. Everybody want to have $170 billion in the bank. Everybody wants to be number one. If I can't be number one, I'm gonna be number two. If I can't be number two, I'm gonna be number three. And so there's always this greed. Anybody see the movie Wall Street? Yeah, greed is good. All right. And so this is just capitalism at work. It's and I'm not an anti-capitalist. All right. I think the free market is a good means of a good system for supply and demand and buying and selling goods. But An unregulated capitalist system is not sustainable. And I'm afraid that we're going to begin to see signs of that in the coming years, because right now it has reached a point. There's got to be a tipping point. There's got to be a tipping point when the 1% has more money, too much money, that is going to topple the system. And no one knows what that tipping point is. So no one is even thinking about it or acknowledging it. In the meantime, what do you think is the answer to inflation? How do we curb inflation? Or how is the Fed trying to curb inflation? Anybody? Okay. Raising interest rates. Okay, we said that earlier. Raising interest rates. And so that means that the corporations won't get the free money that they would normally have available. And so they begin to cut back. And where do they begin to cut back? Labor. Okay, labor. Okay, you've seen the tech companies fire. They're cutting people left and right, thousands of workers, and but the other part of it is that the way capitalism works, that supply and demand, that the supply side has inputs. So that means in order to develop the products that are going to be bought by the consumers, they could you ask me quiet now? In order to they have to keep their costs down, and so labor is always going to be a significant cost, and so that's why they're going to always resist, giving people adequate wages, or at least depressing wages as much as possible. Let's keep the wages down. And so what the Fed is trying to do by raising interest rates is almost, it's like it's tipping the economy into a recession. And so if there's a recession, then demand is lower. And then so that means not as many goods are going to be made, and the prices of those goods are going to go down. Bottom line is that in order to create the recession, they have to cut labor. All right, so we're going to see a situation where for them now, low unemployment is bad news. So we're going to have to get to at least like maybe a 10% unemployment rate in order for the recession to actually begin to lower inflation. So with these different things at work, it is very difficult for our workers to get a decent salary. $15 an hour minimum wage is being, a lot of corporations are fighting against that. We've made some significant progress on $15 an hour minimum wage, but you figure, I think, so maybe we started that effort 15 years ago. We will fight for 15, to get at least a decent wage. Many investor class folk don't think there should be any kind of minimum wage. That let the market decide what the minimum wage is. Let people work for whatever the market bear, so to speak. So if you can hire workers for $12 an hour, Why should you have to pay them $15 an hour because the federal government tell you have to? Because sometimes people will work for anything in order to work. So the government has to step in and say, well, if you got you got to pay a minimum wage of $15. But I'm saying as these struggles are prolonged, then that $15 that was worth something 15 years ago, not worth the same amount in 15 years later. So you get the $15 minimum wage, but you ain't getting $15. You might be getting $12 or $11. That's just, but I'm just, yeah.
So as inflation increases, so does cost of living. So do you think the cycle will work all together? Like if $15 is considered a lot, but the cost of living continues to rise, and then they get inflation and the interest or whatever, do you think it'll help the cycle altogether, or it'll just like be a bad thing?
Well, yeah, I mean, the rise of inflation hurts. It's almost like getting a cut in salary, because it costs more for you to buy the things that you need. And when rents go up, particularly, it really puts a cramp on people, because now that they have less, they were struggling to survive at that point. Now it's even a harder struggle. I've read somewhere where they say that inflation hurts the wealthier more than the average citizen. So I don't know yet. I'm not an economist now. Okay, I'm not trying to pose as an economist, right? But I am very interested in economic issues, because I think that even as social workers, we gotta pay attention to these issues, okay? Because in our struggles to help people, it's not just about helping them to cope with their circumstances, but also we have to do things that are going to try to improve the environment of their circumstances. And the economy is one that we really sometimes don't pay as much attention to as we need to. So I think what are solutions? Okay. I think progressive taxation is really needed. And, we've seen taxation dramatically change in this country. A lot of this happened before you were born, but we go back to the 70s and the 80s. First, Ronald Reagan reduced the top interest rates, I think in his first year, from 70%, which is kind of high, we can argue whether that was too high, to 50%. And then in his next round of tax cuts, it went down to 28%. Okay, and then since then, it's kind of stayed around that rate. I believe it was, I believe Clinton raised it back up a little bit, but George Bush cut taxes mostly for the wealthy, and then we saw Donald Trump do the same thing. So the wealthy has not really been paying its fair share of tax. I guess we can argue what's fair, but certainly they have not been paying taxes at a level to sustain the economic needs of the country. So what's our debt level? How much debt do we have on the books? Anybody? Take a guess. Somebody. Stephanie, how much debt do you think we have?
4 trillion. I'm gonna phone a friend with Mark. I was gonna say trillions, but 4 trillion. I'll go with that.
Anybody else?
Is it around 30 trillion?
You got it. $31 trillion. 31, Stephanie, not 4. Yeah, so we've accumulated, but the reason we're able to do that is because, what's the term? We have the fiat currency. All right, so our currency is dominant in the world. And so we could just print as much money as we want. There will be ultimately I think there's going to be consequences. I think we're at a point now where we're beginning to see some consequences, but we can, so while people are concerned about the debt and the Republicans are railing about, we can't sustain this debt, yet every time they get in office, they cut taxes on the wealthy. And then you got to remember George Bush had a war and nobody paid for it. In fact, he cut taxes. So there is there has been this growing debt, and technically there's we got to pay. We got to pay. We have to pay interest on the debt. If not, we need to be paying down the debt. So the Democrats, I don't know if you've seen Joe Biden's latest budget. Did you see it? Anybody? Well, he is going to try to raise some taxes on billionaires. He wanted to raise the Social Security tax to people earning $400,000. I don't know. Anybody know what the limit is now? It's got to be, much lower than that. But that would also generate, I think, or Medicare rather. That would generate enough money to keep it solvent for some years. So the bottom line is, we need more progressive taxation. The investor class, will always argue that any kind of tax hike is going to be detrimental to the economic growth. Yes, Mark.
Yeah. How do you feel about maybe increased labor rights, where workers, people on the ground level, really everyone that participates in our economy, has a voice, to express their lived experience? Because I know the numbers are important, and taxation and policies are absolutely important. But I also feel like sometimes those things are used to mask or stifle, the voice that comes from the ground level. Because I think ultimately, right, our economy and society is how well people are able to meet their basic needs, to have equity, opportunity, and all the things that every human should have.
Yeah, well, we've witnessed over several decades the decline of labor unions. So with labor unions and collective bargaining, people have some kind of clout to say, hey, we should be paid more. But with the decline in labor unions, and that, that's the first thing Ronald Reagan did when he came into office, was fire all the air traffic controllers to let the unions know that there was a new sheriff in town, and unions were not, on his agenda. And so we've seen a significant decline in the membership of workers in unions, Mark. So that really lowers the wage earners, the workers' ability to gain a decent wage. And we've seen recently where what's his name, Howard Schultz is it, the owner of Starbucks. Now he's being taken to court because of some of his own illegal anti-union busting in Starbucks of all places. So there's this corporate. I mean, there's a corporate mentality that labor should be determined by the free market and not from collective bargaining. And then you have situations where it's hard to tolerate strikes because it depending on what's being struck. I mean, not so bad here, but as it has been in Europe. Okay, we've seen nurses go on strike. We've seen the transit workers or railroad workers go on strike. In France right now, we got people are really upset because they want to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. All right, so it's the economy is not it's not or we haven't had administrations that worked for I don't want to say the little guy, but even the middle class. The middle class has really been eviscerated and that's what made the United States kind of special in that we had a very strong middle class. But most of that, some of the middle class has moved up into the 20%, and some of the middle class has moved into the lower income space. And so we need to rebalance the economy. We need to rethink the economy. And that's going to and I think progressive taxes is kind of going to be the only way to do it. I think you're going to have to raise capital gains taxes again. Capital gains taxes are the taxes that people pay on transactions, like real estate, or if they make when they buy and sell things like companies, they get capital gains, but that money is taxed at a lower rate than the average worker. And those taxes have diminished in terms of what their contribution to the United States. And so we're in a struggle with poverty and inequality. Something's got to give. Eventually something's got to give. Either we're going to have a rebalancing of the economy away from the elite and investors, and more towards the working class, or I think we'll be heading for a depression sometime in the future. So social workers, I mean, you have to stay as abreast of these issues as you can. I'm hoping to launch a podcast soon, and so I can talk about it more, and and get your hear your thoughts and hear your ideas and hear others' thoughts and pressure. Obviously, we haven't talked much about money in politics, but that is a real problem because it gives the wealthy disproportionate influence over the government and the economy, because the way things are set up, they're not giving candidates millions of dollars and not expecting anything in return. We can stop playing that game. Those millions of dollars come with an expectation that they're going to pass laws and there are so many different things that politicians and political operatives know the buttons to push, and the cultural wars that divide us, so that the people often vote against their own interest, and we need to change that. I did a session yesterday with some young social workers. I call it Young Social Workers Speak, because every year I like to hear what young social workers are thinking, because they're thinking a lot different than we are. And one of the young social workers shared with me the Gen Z's got a strategy. They know that they know they have power. They know they have clout, and they could have more right now, but they figured they'd just wait till some of the old folks leave the planet, and then they'll have greater say in what the government does. I had to laugh, because that's not a bad strategy if you think about it. But we need to get them. We have to convince young social workers that you can't wait till the old folk leave. You got it, because by the time some of them leave, it's going to be too late for the planet and for our system to change. But they all understand there's a need for system change. So things like ranked choice voting are things that Chris is going to be trying to promote, because it does allow for more choices and less polarization. Because it would take me a little time to really kind of break down ranked choice voting. But what it eliminates is the two-party duopoly, where you got to pick one or the other, and so each party could vilify the other party, because that if you throw enough mud against them and negative campaigning, it will influence the voters. They'll turn against a party. But when you got 3 or 4 different parties vying for the election, your choices are ranked. Okay, the first person, second person, third person, you rank the candidates. So you vote for somebody to be in first place, second place, third place, fourth place, fifth place, something like that. And the person if the person in first place gets more than 50% of the vote, then it's over. But if he doesn't, then you recalculate how many second place votes did he get, and then how many third place votes did he get. So the bottom line is that you got to be careful about who you vilify, because you might need those votes in order to when doing the recalculation. So I would encourage you to learn more about ranked choice voting. We're seeing it's being expanded in different places. In fact, New York, last mayor election was done by ranked choice voting, and there are some localities that are using ranked choice voting. But we have to think about what we can do as social workers to deal with or impact economic and wealth inequality, because it's going on, and if we can ignore it, but then it's not going to stop, and the longer it goes on, the more consequences will come out of it. So oh wow, I can't believe my time is up.
Did a good job. Thank you, Dr. Lewis.
We talked for 50 minutes. Come on now.
Thank
No,
you.
but I hope I said something that might have helped you to understand wealth and poverty in the United States and why we should really be concerned.
Thank you. Hopefully, I don't know if you guys have any questions, but it is 3:50. So if you do have some questions, we can extend maybe like at least 2 or 3 more minutes. And if you don't, then we would like to give Dr. Lewis a air hand clap.
Well, Dr. Lewis, I do want to know, when are you coming out with your podcast?
I'm looking in the fall of this year. Yeah. So I made an announcement, so I'm putting more pressure on myself.
Nice. I look forward to it.
Okay, now, thank you. I will enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you stick around toward the end, and I'll be back sometime later on.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
So long.